human brain, soft and vulnerable, weight only about 3 pounds. Yet it has not only conquered the world, but presumes even to study itself, and is just beginning to understand some of its own workings. This is an imaginary experiment of Professor Daniel Dennett's. He supposed that his brain could be removed, still alive. Imagine that here it is, still controlling his body, using a two-way radio link-up. He's a human module. Where then is the real Daniel Dennett? With the body and its electronics, or with his brain under the dome? Is the self inside the brain? In this series, we'll be looking at the brain's contribution to vision, memory, language, movement, and fear, each of which contributes to the self. Our concept of the self has recently been radically influenced, not by imaginary experiments, but by a series of real operations. This woman's brain was cut in two. Vicky is one of about 30 patients treated in this way for intractable epilepsy. She spent several months recovering from her split brain operation. Now, 2 years later, she is still somewhat handicapped.
I don't drive. I don't work. I have a daughter, Angel, her name. She just turned 7. Her and I have a very close relationship. I'm divorced. Do I say that? Yes, I do. I said it.
The left and right halves of normal brains are connected by nerve fibers. In Vicky, that connection has been severed, and she is therefore an ideal subject for studying each side of the brain to see if her behavior has also been affected. At first sight, the effects are trivial.
My left hand doesn't feel so coordinated. Doesn't feel like it's got really a lot of coordination in it, but and then I feel like I don't have any confidence.
That's hardly surprising, considering the operation she had. Each hand is controlled by the opposite side of the brain, and now, because of the split, her left often does not know what her right is doing. Although separated, both half brains not only control the mechanics of movement, but can make separate choices and have independent wills. Take choosing clothes, for example.
I knew what I wanted to wear, and I would open up my closet, get ready to take it out. My other hand would just take control. And it would just reach in, whereas my one hand, I told the lady at Medical College Hospital here, I told her I was really fighting with it, and she said to talk to it. Talk to your hand, talk to your arm. Well, I talked to it until it didn't do anything, it didn't do any good. But anyways, it would reach in and get something that I wouldn't want at all. And a couple times I had a pair of shorts on, and then I find myself putting another pair of shorts on top of a pair I already had on, and which I knew was wrong. I wouldn't go out the house that way. I knew that was totally wrong. But something, it didn't tell me, but it just, my hand sort of took control, got that other pair of shorts, and I put them on over the other ones, and I've had trouble like that. And
So each half of Vicky's brain has a separate existence. When, for example, she strikes a match, each hand is controlled by the opposite side of her brain. Because her brain is split, touch cannot pass from side to side. Yet she can still coordinate her hands because she can see. If she couldn't see, she wouldn't even be able to say that she was holding the box, as language is mainly in her left hemisphere, which only knows about the match.
Simply do what it says to do on the screen.
Every few months, Vicky is tested at Cornell University in New York. The tests are designed to channel words or pictures into her separated hemispheres. Dr. Michael Gazaniga has been studying the effects of the split brain operation for 20 years.
I don't understand that.
You know?
Such confusion is common among the other split brain patients Dr. Gazzaniga has tested.
Now, what split brain surgery is the midline section of this structure right here, which is called the corpus callosum. This structure normally interconnects the two half brains. So that means that what information comes in the left brain is immediately communicated to the right and vice versa. In Vicky, we are able to test the separate functioning of each hemisphere by the special kind of lateralized testing that you saw. In particular, in the case where we present visual information in her right visual field, which is over here, that information is projected in her left hemisphere, which is the normally dominant language and speech system in you and me as it is in Vicky. That means if I flash a letter over here, she can normally name it or picture or anything else. However, when you flash the same kind of information in the left visual field, which goes to the right hemisphere, you find that Vicky is not able to easily name it because of this structure having been sectioned. The communication between the two half brains has been eliminated. This time we're going to have you watch some pictures, and after I flash them, I simply want you to describe them to me. Just name the picture you see.
If the image on the right of the screen is very brief, it goes only to the opposite, the left hemisphere.
Football.
Gee, that's awful fast. Give me a chance.
2.
She has no problems naming the objects, because those brief flashes both went to her language hemisphere. But when a picture goes to the right hemisphere, there's a dramatic difference.
Here we go.
A woman. A person.
What else?
A girl.
Okay, I tell you what. Open your eyes. Your left hand. Right what she was doing with your left hand. Close your eyes and just let your left hand go.
The right hemisphere said woman, but did not have enough language to give the full description of the picture. A woman on the phone. There is, though, another means of expression for Vicky's right hemisphere, through this hand.
Good. What did you write?
Skipping rope.
Huh?
Skipping rope.
Skipping rope? No, let me show you what you wrote there.
Telephone.
Yeah, what was she doing?
Talking on the telephone.
Yeah. Remember that?
Yeah.
Good. Perfect.
Vicky saw the picture on her left, which meant that it went to the left side of both eyes. The visual information then traveled to her right hemisphere. It understood the picture and can actually speak because she said woman, but could manage no more. Then, with eyes closed, she was asked to write. That was controlled by her right hemisphere, which instructed her hand to spell out the other feature of the picture, telephone. Dr. Gazzaniga took it away and asked what she'd written. The left hemisphere, eager to speak, had to guess. It hadn't seen telephone and said skipping rope. Then she was shown the written word, and it was seen by both hemispheres. The left hemisphere had already heard the right say woman earlier, so now it could give the full description, a woman on the phone.
So here what you see in this one situation is a right hemisphere emerging with an emerging skill to talk. It captures the correct feature of the picture that there's a lady there, but it doesn't get all of the features, but the writing system of the right hemisphere, which is expressed to the left hand, can capture all of them, and Vicky is able to write out the full description of what in fact had been presented to the right half brain.
But the left hemisphere still dominates. It sees a fan. The verbally subservient right sees a pen. Eyes closed again, Vicky's right hemisphere spells out clearly, pen.
Good. What did you write?
Now the right's trying to speak.
That was,
Well, what did you see that time?
I saw a fan.
Yeah, anything else?
No.
That was the left taking over. Each half brain can
Okay.
express itself separately.
Let's...
Split brain surgery is still occasionally done in America for intractable epilepsy. Dr. Donald Wilson.
This 22-year-old person has been imprisoned by epilepsy for most of his life. He's been tried on every form of anticonvulsant medication known to man and some of the most experimental ones. Nothing has worked. The principle behind this operation is that if the enemy cannot be destroyed, he can be confined. And to this end, we're going to cut the great highway, the corpus callosum, which joins the two hemispheres. And by doing this, try to imprison the epileptic process within the one bad hemisphere so that it will not cross over to the good one.
The operation is now done in 2 stages. This is the second time Dr. Wilson has ventured through this patient's skull. Once the bone is removed, the brain is still protected by another layer of tough tissue, the dura.
Now you're starting to see the brain exposed here. And as the scissors move medially, it's very important to be able to see under so that there are no bridging veins, and there are none. You're a home free. Great.
The surgeon has exposed the right half of the brain, which does not normally deal with language. So any damage here would not destroy language, although it could damage the patient's ability to deal with space, moving through it, or even drawing or map reading.
Great. Nice. Silver clip, paper clips. The brain is pulsating nicely. The brain itself is bathed in a very clear fluid. The next step will be to approach the midline with the brain retractor right here and retract the hemisphere out this way. And at this point, the operating microscope will then be brought into play to do the rest of the job. Cut just a little more there. Right here, yeah.
The business is it?
At this point, the right hemisphere is gently moved away from the midline.
Deep down between the two hemispheres is the corpus callosum.
Yeah. We switch to a higher power. Good. Okay, Dave, I'm going to start to divide the corpus callosum.
In the stark white corpus callosum are 50 million nerve fibers, which the surgeon is now tearing apart. Once they are severed, language, movement, and information from all the senses will not be able to travel from side to side and will be confined to the individual hemispheres. The surgeon knows he's cut through the corpus callosum at this point because he comes across the ventricle. It's a space right in the middle of the brain, filled with the same fluid that the brain floats in.
See the ependymal lining of the ventricle right there? That hole, we're actually not through into the ventricle. We still have a lining left. This little instrument will keep that 2-layer roof of the ventricle intact. A small patty, please.
Beneath the ventricle are the mid and lower brain, which remain undamaged and will continue to pass emotions from one side to the other. The corpus callosum is the bridge between the two hemispheres. So, is the conscious self being cut in two? Or is the conscious self and the mind, of which it is a part, indivisible and in one hemisphere? If so, that would presumably be in the dominant side, the left hemisphere. One scientist, Sir John Eccles, believes that the human self comes from the left hemisphere. If he believes that, then what is in the right?
I don't think it is a conscious self. I don't think it worries about tomorrow. I don't think it worries about, shall we say, moral problems of what it should do and so on. I think those kind of things, or altruistic behavior, are entirely left hemisphere going with self-consciousness. But it has consciousness of a more sophisticated kind than we've been able to show in even chimpanzees. So that's the answer. You haven't then split the soul, the psyche into two, you have left though in the right hemisphere some kind of, what should we say, primitive concept of self.
Until his retirement, Sir John Eccles studied the cerebellum, a walnut-like piece at the back of the brain. For years, he and his colleagues searched for and listened to the firing of nerve cells in the brains of living animals. He received a Nobel Prize and a knighthood for his work. He sees the mind and its products, such as the will and the self, as separate entities from these cells, even in the most trivial human activities.
The simple action of raising a coffee cup to my mouth involves two amazing things. Firstly, there is the machinery, the muscles, the thousands of nerve fibers, the millions of nerve cells that are concerned. Then there are the complex interacting circuits by which the cerebellum takes over all of this and gives me the smoothness of operation as when I put my cup to my mouth. The second amazing thing is the will. How by taking thought I can carry out any action that I please. If anybody tells you how that happens, don't believe him. We still are completely ignorant of the way in which mind controls the operations of nerves.
If the mind controls the nerve cells, it's a double or dual system. Sir John is therefore a dualist. Professor Daniel Dennett is not.
What the dualist does, inspired by the quite correct intuition that you can't just locate the self like a little nugget somewhere in the brain, what the dualist does is to invent a magical space and inhabit it with some new substance, the mind, as if that solved the problem. That couldn't solve the problem. That's just giving up. It leaves all the truly interesting questions of how the mind works not only unanswered, but unanswerable. No dualist has yet proposed any tests or devices for measuring the activity of the non-physical mind. And in fact, if one were to propose such a test, I think the dualist would say, well, whatever you're testing, it can't be the non-physical mind because that is in principle beyond the ken of science. But once that card has been played, we can see that the dualist is really advocating a sort of counsel of despair and saying, well, there are these mysteries and we cannot address them, and so we can cover our embarrassment by inventing a mysterious substance called the mind and sweeping all the difficult problems under that spectral rug.
Sir John Eccles believes that Vicky's mind controls her nerve cells. Daniel Dennett believes that there are only nerve cells, that she does not have a separate mind.
Tell you what you do now. Your left hand, okay, close your eyes.
Which belief is better to explain Vicky's evident internal conflicts?
What would go with that?
Just let your left hand do what it wants to do. You know, just kind of say, go with it, left hand.
If she hears a sound, at what point does the mind, according to Sir John, control the nerve cells in her brain?
What comes in through all our sense organs and what goes on in all our thinking and so on has got a basis in neural performance. But it is only that. When you get say, light coming in on your eyes, and it goes through and it's coded into something like this in the brain, and more millions of cells, hundreds of millions, will be firing in patterns and special places. They'll still be just doing that, and yet you see a green light. They don't tell you anything about why you see a green light. You have to produce that out of your mind. You create it. Or, on the other hand, you may get another lot of firings like this, and you're feeling a pain. But there's no pain in the world at all. You've made the pain, but the pain isn't explained by this firing, but it is read out by you, and you suffer with it. But you created your own pains.
Professor Patrick Wall is a scientist who is familiar with the idea that there is a mind separate from the brain.
That, of course, is the approach which some people take, often for good reasons, because one has to admit that, of course, religion comes in here, that there are people who wish to assign part of us to, if you like, the area which God is responsible for and which is not available for our examination. I do not take that line. I do not believe that we have reached any clear-cut evidence that that line is necessary.
Professor Wall actually does experiments on the pains that Sir John believes the mind creates. Among them are experiments on himself in his laboratory at University College, London.
I'm going to put my hand in iced water, which is, of course, going to be painful. But what I want to observe in addition is what's happening to the rest of my body. Of course, it immediately feels cold. And then the pain begins to mount. And I will hold it in as long as I can. And in the top line, the heart rate is being measured. And in the lower line, my respiration is being measured, and also how hard my body is working. And at about here, it's becoming pretty unpleasant. And what you see is my heart rate going up, my rate of breathing going up, and the amount of carbon dioxide dropping down.
Clearly, his whole body, including his brain, is reacting to pain. Is a separate mind necessary as well?
Then I'll take it out, and then you will see the slow recovery of the heart rate and the respiration. Classical view really has been it's also the intuitive view, has been a two-stage process. First the body, the mechanics, delivering a pure sensation, and then something quite separate, the mind, examining that pure sensation and deciding whether it's good, bad, whether you hate it, etc. And I find that separation to be an artificial one. It's a convenient one to think of, but one continually sees that in a real situation, I'm not speaking now of curious laboratory situations, that pain comes as a package. As you feel it, you hate it. And at the same time, as we've seen here, there are huge integrated changes of the entire body, all occurring simultaneously. Now, people have gone further with this separation of first body, then mind, and actually attempted to locate the mind and even to separate it out. And that, I think, is a deep misunderstanding, because I believe that the mind is a process of the brain, not something which can be extracted. One can think of an analogy here.
These objects cannot do much by themselves, just as individual brain cells can't. Yet they have a potential which is unimaginable until they're assembled correctly. Professor Wall believes that when millions of humble brain cells are connected up together, the new emerging product of their operation is the mind. Noise and speed are properties of a complete motorbike, yet are not among its components. In the same way, the perception of green or of pain, or the feeling of love or responsibility could be properties of the complete assembled brain. Sir John Eccles believes they are inventions of the mind. Professor Wall disagrees.
Now, it is quite ridiculous to take a motorbike, to bits and try to extract a bucket of speed. But that's exactly the way in which we think of our minds, and in which some scientists think that you could locate it and pull it out, point a finger, say, that is the mind, I'm taking the mind out and I'm examining it separately. I think that is a deep, fundamental philosophical misunderstanding. It's also a biological insult. We don't make separate pieces of machinery. We evolved to behave, to cope with the world, to do things. And we're not going to be doing it first mechanically and then subtly. That would not be the way that you would grow something as marvelous as a mouse or a man.
Patrick Wall believes that animal brains and our brains work in similar ways. Professor Wall views man as only the king of the animals. One can imagine how an animal brain could enable humans to move, to behave, but surely there is a gulf between man and the animals when it comes to, say, responsibility. Responsibility is an abstract notion, yet here it's expressed as a frozen movement. The same can be done for a whole range of emotions and states of mind. Many apparently abstract and moral concepts may be represented in the brain as patterns of movements, as behavior. What, though, about pure thought, not involving behavior?
Now, quite obviously, there are aspects of the mind which are not concerned with overt behavior. I may be sitting and thinking. But I believe that those aspects of the mind can be seen in the same context, but more as a rehearsal stage. What would happen if I did something? For the moment, I'm not going to do anything, but I will rehearse possibilities. And this then puts even your conscious thinking without behavior into the context of one's normal behavior. Most of the time, we are moving in the world, reacting to it, or reacting to things going on inside ourselves. Sometimes we're faced with real puzzles, fascinating puzzles, threatening puzzles, and we sit back and, if you like, play the game in our minds. But the game is not one of just pure intellectual thought, but it's one related to the real world, related to what is in the world and how we should behave to it.
If Professor Wall and other materialists are correct, Vicky's brain activity gives rise to her mind, and therefore herself. So when her brain was split, did she become two people? Do they now conflict when caring for Angel?
Can I go down the swing for you so I can go high? Pumping already.
To Sir John Eccles and other dualists, there is no conflict. All her feelings of responsibility come from the left hemisphere. She is one person, and in that left hemisphere, according to Sir John, is a non-substance called the mind, which controls her.
I'm coming over to hold the other side.
Now you're like, what?
To decide if the mind does have a separate existence, and if she is one or two people,